I'd like to call to order the policy meeting, noting that all of our members are in attendance, Katie and Judy, as well as Andy and Amy here. So first thing I'd like to do is have an approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Also noting we have a couple of public comments, so I think we'll start with those. Knowing that we have 3 minutes to speak on each of them, so we'll start off with John.
Sure. Morning, everybody.
Morning.
So as far as I've talked about the opt-in policy and then what the CDC is voting on.
Please state your name and your relationship to the district.
John Sheriff, Waunakee taxpayer. Father. Anyways, so as far as the there's so many there's so much curriculum that there's a lot of people that are a lot of parents I've spoken to that are it's just not the kind of curriculum they want their kids to be exposed to. So we need a really good policy on opting out and not a shaming of it and not a you have to make it up per se, because in the end the parents are really the ones who fund the school system, fund the educational system. So the parents in the end really should be the ones who make the decision when it's all said and done. And we need to put more control back in their hands. And this opting out policy needs to be very easy to work with. I would even suggest that we actually have an opting in policy that would really give the parents control, especially with certain when it comes to like sexuality and when it comes to different things that might be against a person's faith. So you know, we separate faith and schools right now, which is not how this country was founded, but that's what we're doing right now. We also need to honor people's faith at the same time that we're honoring people that don't believe in God. So we need to honor both sides of the equation. So allow that person not to be shamed and to opt out of these classes that they disagree with how they're being taught in public schools. Secondly, CDC is looking like they're going to put this vaccine for that we've gone through the last 3 years. They're going to put this on the required vaccination list for schools. We'll be opposed to that. There are many people that have had issues with this vaccine that they've taken. There's been side effects. There's been illnesses. It's not being fully reported. For some reason, when everyone was taking the test for this virus that we had, everyone was dying from it. Every time there was a death or any illness, it was always this. But now, when someone has the vaccine and they have something else happen to it, it's never the vaccine. Why is that? It has to do with money. Schools are making decisions the same way, based on money that's funded from the government. This needs to end. We need to shepherd. We need to be strong and courageous. We need to look out for our kids. We can't just look out strictly for the money. We have to take care of our kids and do what's in our kids' best interest. That's their health and well-being and their education. We need to get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic, and we need to stop the social indoctrination that's been happening. It needs to end, and it's going to end. One way or the other, it's going to end, whether it's this year or next year, it's going to end. People are starting to stand up and speaking up around the nation. So if we are always putting the kids first, their best interest, we will always be in a good place. So I just thank you for your time today. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Second speaker, Greg.
My name is Greg Jens. I live in the district. I have 2 daughters in the district. I just want to talk about policy 333 today that's on the agenda. The very first one that's on the board packet, parent rights in relation to district programs, activities, and student privacy. I'm totally for this policy, and I thank you for bringing it to the board. It looks like it's largely to get into compliance or create a policy with federal statute, section 20 US code, the Protection of Pupil Rights Act that was passed in 1978. Specifically on that 4-page handout on the board packet, on the very first page under section 3, is a yellow highlighted area. When you get into it, it talks about if the district conducts mental health assessments or any child or arranges to provide mental health services to any child. The next couple, or the next sentence talks about then to the extent required by applicable law or is otherwise deemed appropriate by the administration, the district shall provide written notice to child's parents, basically parental notification on mental health screening or services for individual child is what it looks like to me. I hope that maybe we could tweak that wording. It looks like it's providing wording that would not inform a parent if those services are allowed, if that was okay with law. I would hope that we would go in a more strict fashion that any kind of services like that be a shall notify parents. And I understand that this is probably mirroring the US code. So that was my hope on that section, is that we could make it a little bit more, and that might be the intent of the school completely. But to have it codified like that in our policy, I think would be appropriate, that any kind of mental health, individual screening or services given to a child is absolute parental notification. And then on the second page of that same policy, under the item 4 that's right on top, if you go down to subsection B, it talks about any non-emergency invasive physical examination. I just want to read what invasive physical examination is under the federal act, where it's defined. It says the term invasive physical examination means any medical examination that involves the exposure of private body parts or any act during such examination that includes incision, insertion, or injection into the body, but does not include hearing, vision, or scoliosis screening. So kind of the same kind of wording. It goes back to that B in our agenda packet too. At the very end of that paragraph in B, it says, except that this paragraph shall not be interpreted to apply to any such examination or screening that is required to express or expressly authorized by state law, talking about parental notification. Again, my guess is that's not indicated, or the school's intention would not be to not notify parents if it was an invasive physical examination. But I think the wording of the paragraph leaves that open, so I hope that can be changed. And in just the very last sentence, it says that aren't expressly authorized by state law, indicating that there are some expressly authorized ones. If we could just get some clarification to what those examples are in state law that are authorized. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. That concludes the public comment portion. So with that,
I think there was one that came in by
There was.
email too, just to kind of acknowledge that.
correct. We did get one from you. And I assume you all read that. Yep. So with that, we'll jump right into our continuing review of the 300 series. I'll turn it over to Randy to put that on.
Thanks, Ted. So we're going to be working off of the, does everybody have a copy of that?
No, I didn't get that.
That's all right. We're going to work through right in order from the way that.
So you have a copy.
I have a copy.
We have it in our board book.
give it our-
Yeah.
All right, super, thank you.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at policy 333. This is the one we had public comments on. Yeah, there's a lot in this policy. This is not a thin policy. It's got a number of different attachments to it. And I think really where I see us here today is certainly if we can come to a conclusion on where we'd like to go, that'd be great. I would also like to move this forward to the board. So even if there are questions here from the board that we need to do some additional research in, I think it's worthy of us getting those and still forwarding it to the board. So that's, I guess, the direction I'd like to go with it. But generally what you're looking at is as you heard, it's really with regards to parents' rights in relation to district programs and activities. And there are certain areas that the parents do have options to opt their child out. And as articulated, there are certain instances where different levels of consent are required. And I think that's part of what the gist of this policy is getting at. And it's things that we've been dealing with administratively, particularly, I mean, continually throughout our, I guess, my time in education, we've always had questions with regards to what would you have to participate in or not. I think it's definitely become much more of an astute conversation that we've had recently with more parents. And it's an appropriate policy for us to provide some guidance to it. This one is really kind of dictated based off of really strictly with kind of what state and federal law is calling for. So it's relatively pointed in that area. It does have some areas for, and as you can see, if you take a look at what the WSB wrote to us, they gave us lots of different kind of feedback pieces and places that are open for discussion for us. So I guess with that, I'm just going to open it up for questions that people have. I mean, there's definitely aspects that require us to have some written notification, but there's also options in different places where it's either opt-in, it's either the active consent or the passive consent. Active consent being that somebody actually has to sign their child up to actively participate in it. And a passive consent would be an issue where we notify everybody and let them know that they are able to opt out of it. I think from an administrative standpoint, the passive consent is one that we feel we can manage the best. It's also in those situations when there's particularly pieces that we are utilizing that information as data as far as how we improve and move forward, we have the best response rates. But obviously there's a flip side to that, saying if I more actively can then opt my child in versus always having to opt out. Those are the two sides of the point. From an administrative standpoint, our team prefers the passive consent because it allows us then to make sure we do the notice. That's the onus on us to make sure that that occurs. And then parents have the addition of then they have the option to then opt out and communicate with us. But that's part of the discussion, and as Ted and I talked as we went through the initial review, that's really a piece I think that the board needs to weigh in, and as far as kind of where you see some of those from a community perspective at this point.
And I think as we talked about that, some of the concerns may be brought up. If you put it more of an opt-in, there's so many people there, that parent-wise, you have some that are very engaged, some that are not, and more so, unfortunately, that aren't engaged. So if you do the opt-in, you aren't going to get that participation.
That's the concern that we have administratively with that. And we certainly respect the ability for someone to opt out, but we also realize that some of the pieces that we're trying to do, if it's solely opt-in, it may truly impact some of the reasons that we're giving it in the first place.
And I mean, although that is important, I still, it does change the onus a little bit that you know, it's I don't know how else. I think it is more for the parent. It should be more in the parents controlling that. I mean, I'm more for the opting in. Just with some of the types or the natures of some of these surveys coming out. I don't know if it's a better way of informing them or engaging them. That's probably the difficult choice. Like, what is the best way to notify them and make sure they're on top of it so they get a response instead of, oh, I forgot to do that.
How often are we surveying students?
And that's really part of the conversations we've had. Because if you look at the one that we had public comments on in writing here, and then we also look at, I think it's page 3, where it talks about the ones that have some additional kind of federal laws tied to it. You're kind of looking at that second bullet point, mental and psychological problems of the student and the student's family. To how do you define that? And that's because we have teachers who will do a survey to say they're just trying to get an assessment of their class. How are you doing today? It's been a long week. How's everybody doing at the end of the week? Does that fall there? Because you're really testing how are kids doing? How are they mentally doing? How are they kind of feeling about school? Does that fall within that type of a survey? Our argument would be no. That's just part of what we do as teaching. We've done that forever. You do it in different formats. There's certainly things like some of our more formalized assessments that come out that probably do fall under that do need more of an active consent piece to it. But it's trying to figure out which ones fall where, and particularly as we start to look at things around kind of the social emotional learning pieces. Certainly, I mean, those are all things that are kind of those things that are tied into our lessons with kind of getting along, belonging, relationships. How are you kind of working through those? Some of those surveys, I mean, I think that there's an effort to kind of define those under there. And I think that we would argue that many of them wouldn't fall under there. So it's really a question of when we define it under, we have to then define what is and what isn't. And that's the piece that I think is something we have to do by moving forward too. So I mean, there is a part here, I think, as part of the policy is, do we identify some of these assessments in policy? I would argue we probably don't need to do them in, I wouldn't want to do them in policy because then they have to keep coming back formally through here. But they probably need to be articulated and either put as an administrative rule or something that goes along with the policy to articulate it. So that may be a piece that would be helpful as we kind of go forward and look at this to see kind of what is and what isn't that falls within that, so that we have a better understanding of kind of what we're actually voting on. But that's a conversation.
Okay. 'Cause, my understanding is there's a few surveys that come out either from the county or maybe from the state.
Right.
That cover, that as a parent, we have the option, historically, I know, to opt out of it. And so I think it's just a matter of, I mean, some of those surveys are, surveying, I would say, sensitive topics or could be considered sensitive or private or whatever. So I think you're talking about the different contents of the surveys, I think those surveys are ones that as a parent, you'd want to know what's being surveyed. And I know that kind of gets but that parents should have the option on those to opt into those surveys. But if it's a survey that's more informal, like things that teachers, like you described, are doing forever to kind of gauge the climate of their classroom from a classroom management perspective, or to gauge academically how students feel they're doing, then I think that's it. So, like
And
you
I
said,
agree.
articulating. Sorry.
And it's tough, that line is probably
Yeah.
different for everyone. Not everyone has that same line.
Mhm.
And that's where I think those that are really engaged are concerned with this. Like, your line is totally not what mine is. And so for me to agree to, or always have to like look at that,
Right.
I'd rather have the default of not opting, or given the choice to be put into it, so going on with it. Yeah.
I kind of think it's important that we're as transparent and the public has access to what we're doing. But I think it's hard to run an organization if you're only opting in. I think that's administratively really cumbersome. So, and I do think there's a large portion of the population that are very happy with what the school is doing, and they don't want to be told every month what's coming, and they're not as engaged. Not that they don't care, but they just trust what's going on. But I do think we have to have the availability to see what we're doing by anybody who wants to see it. But I'm not for opting in. I'm for opting out. With a lot of information out there.
In cases where this maybe has been sensitive or has come up, has it been maybe you can answer it, has it been where the parents truly weren't notified, or they were notified it wasn't transparent enough to say what was going on? Like, is that part of it? It's like,
I think there's probably some accuracy around every argument here. I mean, are there some that they missed it and didn't see it, and then their kids participated and that brought questions? Certainly. Are there some things that we can always do better moving forward? If you kind of look back at hindsight, make sure that we provide the notice, certainly there too. Are there things that are missed where someone says, I want my child to opt out, and for one reason or another, it's usually something that's either just been miscommunicated or just was not on purposely missed. Has that happened? Yes. Has there been times when somebody has opted in and a student has taken something that they knew they shouldn't take? Yes. All of those have happened. So it's been, so I think as you kind of talk about all the scenarios or things that we hear on both sides of it, all of them are accurate. It's really, it kind of gets down a little bit to what Judy's saying is, how do you then manage those things? And then the question comes is, well, why do we do this? I mean, I think that's part of the dialogue as well. Where does this fall in education? Well, part of the things that we have to manage is a few different pieces. Is one, certainly trying to teach kids is more than just standing up and delivering curriculum. A lot of that is built off of relationships, getting to know the kids and knowing kind of where they're at. We do know right now that we had, prior to pandemic, we had higher increases of stress, anxiety, and depression. Those are things we need to know as we're kind of looking at how do we kind of work with our kids. And I think our families need to know that, because you're not seeing it necessarily just in your own household, or you feel completely isolated like it's your own piece. So that's a piece that we look at, is how do we support kids throughout that, not only in the academic classroom, but just as in our student services areas and other places. We look at things like the Dane County Youth Risk Assessment Survey. So that's a big one, and that's one that we've given that for 20 years.
Yeah.
That's not a new survey. It gives you data along things around like how are kids, what are they doing as far as decision making. And I always go back to something that's, it's kind of old research, but I kind of point to it as, if you want kids to be successful in life, they have to have as many attributes as possible. Remember the old attribute models. And part of that was we started to look at all of these risk factors had different, the more things that you could do for support. If you had an adult in the school that had a personal connection with the student, that was a positive attribute that kept them from doing something else. If they're involved in co-curriculars, if they're involved in school, if they have other things that are happening in their life. Those are all pieces that then help to kids to be more well-adjusted. As they're more well-adjusted, they're going to be more successful, and it gives us information as far as how then the population of kids we serve. So that's really the why behind it. And then we have staff who are then working to help with kids and knowing kind of what some of the issues that are being challenged with, working with parents to see how we can then help move those forward. And those all impact us academically. So that's the why. You know, I think part of it is then is kind of how do we kind of move forward with some of these pieces to make sure that we have the information that we feel we need as we work with our families and know kind of the demographics and the needs of the kids, that what they bring to us, not only academically, but also emotionally and all the different and risk factors that they're participating or not participating in. A great example is, if you look at things like, when I was in high school, people always snuck out to go smoking. Smoking pretty much disappeared until vaping came online. And now vaping continues to be an issue. We just heard from our Waunakee Community Care Coalition kids that they feel that that's on the rise again. And so it's all of those type of things of trying to get a sense of kind of where are kids participating, what are they doing, and how do we need to be kind of either making sure we can support kids in school, make sure we have our eyes on the right things. How do we build relationships with kids, and how do we communicate with parents about all those? So it's kind of that whole child approach versus just focus solely on one piece, which is the academic piece, which we agree is our core business. That's what all of those things in our view helps us to be better teachers and be better educators of all of the other core subjects. So that's where it sits. And I think the hardest piece, that at least when I look at and I read some of the, like that second bullet point on mental and psychological problems of students, is kind of where it is at. I think you're right, Ted. It's everybody's got a different line for it. For some, there's like zero tolerance, but I don't want any of that. But I think we also need to know that. We need to know some of those things as we're working with kids and just trying to kind of figure out kind of where we're at. I mean, I look at things from like you flip it from like the education world over to like the athletic world. We do team bonding activities. We do all of those things. Those are all social emotional pieces that are helping kids to can relax, reduce anxiety, go out and part and perform their best. It's the same thing academically. And that's really what we're trying to do.
So, but I get it. The point of the survey is totally, I get it, you want to gauge it, but it's all anonymous. It's all anonymous on any of these surveys, which it's intended they're supposed to be, I think. So is that not true, or do we have?
That's true. All of these are anonymous, I believe. Is there anything looking at Tiffany and?
Yeah, the YRBS or day point assessment is anonymous, but when we do our own like mental health screening, we have to be able to tie it back to the student so that the social worker or student services staff member can follow. With the family.
There are some of those.
May I make a comment?
Typically, no.
We've done it some of those other subcommittees, but you know.
Well, I think we got quite a bit to get through.
Yeah, it's just not.
I guess one of the things is, would it help for the board? This is a big topic. I'm not trying to say it's not. Is would it help for us to, as we bring this forward to the full board? I think that's worthy of a good conversation there. For us to kind of bring some of the examples of what we're actually talking about.
I think that would be helpful.
So that way you can at least see kind of what are those big ones that you're talking about. We can name them. We can talk a little bit about what these are, why we do them.
Okay.
And would that be helpful?
Yes.
At least give you an idea of what those are.
And is there a sense of how it's made known to the public? You know, how do
We
they
can do that.
know that what's coming in this year?
What we could try to do is maybe see if we can put it into some sort of a chart that just shows you kind of what is it, when is it given, who's it given to, kind of like we do for our academic assessment schedule.
Yes.
We could do something similar. Now, it's not going to hit everything because an individual teacher is always going to be wondering how their individual kids are doing. They do something on a formative level, very informally. I see that as outside of this. This is really more of the things that we're doing that are, I think we can try to articulate those between our ed services team. We can put together at least a list of what those look like, kind of give you an idea of that picture and bring that into
To include the letters that go to the parents.
Yeah.
That might be good.
Yeah, we can bring some of those examples that we have. This
And-
gives you the update. I mean, as for those of you who are parents, you see that, Judy, you wouldn't see those things coming forward. So we can bring that piece forward. So you at least can see what we're doing. then we
And
can
I'd
have a
like to
conversation.
minimize the acronym. I don't know what the letters stand for.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, there's a couple different ones. As Katie said, there's some that come from the state, there's some that are county driven. They all have different kind of purposes. There's things that we've done that are tied into some of our other work. There's some that are kind of locally developed for specific purposes. So we can at least give you some examples of what those are.
Great.
Okay, so I guess what I would recommend right now, Ted, is are there any other questions on the other items of the policy? Because the first page really talks about what people have the ability to kind of opt out of. And this is kind of some of the stuff like with regards to human growth and development, et cetera. And those are things that have been there. Some of those are driven by statute. So that's kind of where those pieces are. But I think the biggest piece that at least I get the questions about are the survey instrument type things. People can test and opt out of like state assessments. That's articulated here. It gives you kind of what those statutorily kind of what you can do, and then there's the survey.
So we're gonna move this forward to the whole board.
I'd move it. I don't think I need an action on it. And you can basically say we
We
can.
discussed.
What I would do is if you're comfortable, I'll just move it.
Discussion.
Yeah, we can just move it to the full board because there's a lot of different pieces here. Let us bring some of the examples, but I think
Yeah.
it's timely for us to get it moved.
To get it, yeah,
We
I do
all
too.
need that.
That makes sense.
You're okay with that?
Mhm.
Okay, great. All right, we're gonna move on to our next one, which is 341.31. two things here. One of them I will have before it goes to the full board, which is really which administrator is in charge of that. We have a couple of our administrators aren't here right now. One is out for other reasons that I just haven't had a chance to connect with. So I will fill in the blank where it says who is responsible for the human growth and development piece. But human growth and development is one that people have. They're definitely driven by statute. The one piece that we want to include is the set, and underneath the green area there's the yellow one. Can you point to it with your cursor? Yep, right there. Thank you. And this is just with regards to any changes to human growth and development curriculum. And our recommendation is that those would come back to the board for approval. So human growth and development is one of the programs that we have to bring back through a community committee. That's actually written and driven by statute and DPI as far as what that committee's makeup has to be and how large it can be. So there are times when we're taking a look at like how many even in school administrative personnel can have on there, then dictates how large that committee becomes. So I think when we ran it through this year, this 2019-ish, I think is when we were completing our review of it, that was at a point where I think the committee probably had 8 to 10 people as part of it. If we would have added another administrator to it, it would have doubled in size. So it's a piece we have to control some of those things, but we feel that they give the direction for what some of the curricular areas are for human growth and development. That's a community-based committee. And then we would see if there was anything that came up outside of that that needed to come back for approval. We felt it should come back through the school board. So that's what we're recommending. Then on the second page of the policy, the second bullet point down, where it's highlighted, how long should that be reviewed? Our recommendation is at least every 5 years. So that's kind of the maximum extent that can go with before it's reviewed. We had thought about 3 years and 5 years. We thought the 3-year turnaround was just too quick. By the time you actually have the committee meet, then implement what you're doing, and then you're back reviewing it again. So our thought was to do it at least every 5 years. If something substantively comes up, this is just a guideline that we have to do it at least that frequently, but we could do it more frequently, either by administrative directive or by board directive.
Because we really haven't done it in a lot of years, have we?
This hadn't been done yet. We really didn't have a strong policy that said how long, how frequently it needed to be done. So our view is that that's a strength to this, is it puts it under a cycle.
Mhm.
But yeah, it hadn't been reviewed for a lot of years.
But it
So
was in 2019.
It was in 20, we
Oh,
did
it
it,
was.
we did it in 2019,
Oh,
but prior to that, it was quite a few years before that.
Okay.
So, other than that, we're comfortable with the recommendation. I will work on putting the administrator in charge of that part of it. It's within our ed services department, so we have to determine who's going to be the head person for that. But with those two recommendations, we recommend the policy.
And it's up to that individual to create the makeup of the committee.
Right, that's usually then the piece that then they come back through that link. And previously what we did is we then would bring that to the board for them to review. That's what our practice was in 2008.
To
So you
review
can
for
put that
approval or
policy.
anything, or just review and say, this is what we're doing. And
see if
just
there's
curious.
I
anything.
think we actually had the
Concerns.
board kind of adopt.
Okay.
Yeah, we had some recommendations if we could be part of it. I think there was some applications if we could be part of it. And then we made the appointment and brought it to the board. It becomes actually a very formalized piece. It becomes it's one of those committees that meets and it's a publicly noticed meeting, if I recall.
And as it states here, they're gonna come up with recommendation that goes over the board anyway.
Right, so they make up recommendations and that recommendation that gets forwarded to the board, that gets adopted by the board and we move forward. And so that's really what the process is.
So motion to approve policy or 34231, and then
Second,
341.
and then, and also
Oh,
to
is it
341.
341? Sorry, 34131.
Yeah. And
To
we're
move
getting
it.
rid of the rule.
Move it to
I
the board.
seconded, yeah.
Yeah, to approve and move to the board.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The next item here is 341.3. And this is one with regards to health education and parental objection. So this is a policy that as we adopt 333, our recommendation is then simultaneously to repeal this one because that would be addressed within that other policy. So this is an example again of where we've had separate policies for several different items. And then WASB is kind of, their recommendation was we kind of put them into one. So 333, which we just reviewed initially today, would include this in there. So upon adoption of that, we would recommend repeal of this.
Did you understand all that, Danny? Or you get what's going on because this is
Read
kind of,
it, that it.
yeah.
it's
So
repetitive,
when we
yeah,
adopt the 333,
is
that will be included
Yeah.
and then we would.
Second,
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Then moving on to 342.1. This is with regards to programs with students with disabilities. This is one that Tiffany had reviewed. Our recommendation, well, I should pull it up there. So where it's talking about the administrator in charge, that would be our director of special education. That's all right. Do you want to scroll down, please? So we'll insert director of special education under the yellow items where it's looking for the individual who would be in charge of that. There was also a piece where we said IDEA policies, procedures, and forms. Was one where that was a with and without. Rebecca, where did you put that?
oh, something.
Right.
It's in the green,
Yeah,
isn't it?
so our Tiffany's recommendation was without. It's an option that we had. And then moving over to the second page, again, it's just including who's the contact person, that's the director of special education. And then the one place is really who is the LEA, the local education agency. When we have an IEP meeting, that's where the person is making decisions for the district. There's a practice right now is that can be any administrator or school psychologist. So our school psychologists have that authority along with our administration. It's just not possible for someone like Tiffany to be at all IEP meetings across the district. Those are the meetings about the individual plans for kids with disabilities. So
How many
those are,
psychologists do we have? We need to go to another layer lower. Oh.
It's 7 right now.
Will that be enough?
Yeah, right now, I mean, at times, it's not, you'll hear, in our proposal for next year is gonna be 2 special education coordinators, which serve as like a K-6, 7, 12
Yeah.
coordination, just because of the need, not just for that, but a whole bunch of other.
Because you need to be able to be flexible when you meet with parents, and if you've got a narrow pool, it gets harder. and
right now,
harder.
that's what our practice is, Judy. I mean, we don't move it. Yes, that's generally what we see.
And it could be the principals, also
could be
the
the-
building
yeah.
principals or
Yeah,
those
Right.
administrators.
So it could be any of our administrative.
Assistant principals.
Yeah.
Assistant principals, anybody on the admin team, and then the school sites. Normally, it's the school psychologist. And I think that's kind of our default, isn't that what you say that's accurate? in
Yeah, it
most
just
cases?
depends on who's available, a lot of principals too.
But that's our recommendation, and this is one that Tiffany has reviewed, and we would recommend approving this policy as written.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Tiffany, for the next one, can I have you come forward? This is the homebound one. This might be a little different than what you and I talked about, Ted, because I think when, this is with regards to 342.2 homebound instruction. You might just give them like a 30-second elevator speech of what homebound instruction is. and then
Yeah,
we'll use it.
basically it's for a student that maybe, has a significant medical need, like where right now we have a student at the high school, a couple students at the high school, like significant, so that might be cancer, it might be a transplant, it might be, and really like their doctor will tell us like they can't come to school, like, but we still need education. If they're in the hospital, there's a teacher at every hospital in Madison, so we actually just communicate with the teacher at the hospital, so they're able to get that. But once they come home, then they don't have that access, so we do homebound instruction. It is not like a full day of school, obviously, because their condition doesn't allow for that. So it's usually 2 hours to 2.5 hours working on core academics with students. And the same is true for a student with a disability. We would write that and be part of their plan, would be written in as part of their plan, that homebound instruction would be most appropriate to that student based on medical reasons. That's usually why, in some couple of extreme cases around mental health, but not very many. More it's about just physical medical issues.
And the one question that through our review at WASB brought up the two highlighted areas. And we never bring anything really back from an approval of like this type of thing to the board. It's really an administrative decision.
Right.
And then can you speak to the, I mean, I think you brought that up yesterday, and then also with regards to the 30 days.
Yeah, at the 30 days part, I mean, if it was a student with a disability, we wouldn't say, okay, we're not gonna provide any services to you until you hit the 30-day mark. Like our IUP team would meet, decide what we need to provide, and we would provide it based on what was laid out in the IEP. I don't know how that's different in terms of regular, but I would assume it's probably true with a regular ed student too, if they had like an acute medical event. We're not gonna say, oh, we'll wait 30 days. So I think it's really about whatever's most appropriate. You know, if the student's in the hospital all that time, of course, we're not gonna do homebound at that time, but I think, the 30 days probably is.
So you let a medical person suggest it's going to be 30 days.
Right, and it's really we-
Extended
Right, we go with whatever the direction of the medical professional is, you know, when they're strong enough, because there might be times they come home from a hospital and they're not strong enough to have, you know, they just need to rest. So we would go based on whatever the recommendation is from the medical provider.
And homebound means you go into the home.
Yes.
What we could modify this to be is in that first part, homebound instruction for regular education students may be provided at the discretion of the administration for students who are unable to attend school. I mean, this is not something that is done frequently. These are pretty extreme cases where someone's just not able to be there for many reasons. And then the second part is homebound instruction for students with disabilities who are unable to attend school. Just take out the 30 days. Is what we do.
Yeah.
And it's going to follow through with our IEP and then the connections with the physician.
So the first one you changed to at the discretion of
The administration.
the administration.
Then we could put that as, you could put me with, or my designee. And I think that's how we dealt with that in the past. It could be at the discretion, as maybe provided by the district administrator or his or her designee.
I'm good with that.
Motion to approve policy 342.2 with the suggested adjustments.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The next one.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks, Tiffany. 342.7, this is services and programs for English learners. This is one that actually just came to you this past June. We did not have one. And as we started to program more for our students with who have English learning needs, this is one that Chris Mand actually worked on previously. And through our review with the School Board Association, we don't see any need at this point to change this policy. It's just more that we're going to affirm them and we're going to keep this one. So it doesn't need any action. It's just more as we're kind of going through and reviewing them that we did not have a policy for English learners. We inserted one this summer. That one adequately serves our needs, so we'll keep it. The next one is 342.8. This is with regards to 504 plans. 504 is for students with disabilities who don't qualify for programs through our special education department. So this might be somebody like you may have a hearing loss and you need just accommodations in order to access the curriculum. You may need preferential seating. You may have a hearing device, something of that nature. It's really meant for an accommodation plan versus a total change or rewrite of a curriculum. So we do have a number of kids who have these type of plans in place for different needs, either physical or learning needs, that are kind of helping us then to make accommodations in their program. And what we're recommending here is to agree with the recommendation that we have for the policy revision from the School Board Association and their policy resource guide. We would add that the person in charge of that, overseeing it, would be the Director of Special Education, that would be Tiffany. And then if there were any appeals or complaints or concerns with regards to that, that would then come to my office. So, the second page, we refer to district administrator.
And on our meeting, I asked how many this applies to, and was surprised that, it said there's like several hundred in the district.
How many do we have right
I'd say
now?
about 200, yeah.
A couple hundred.
Is there's no policy as how they qualify for a 504?
Yep, there is.
I know there must be a procedure, but
There is, absolutely. It's overseen by the Office of Civil Rights, so we have a specific process that we have to follow. If you think about an evaluation for a special education student, it's very similar. So we have to go through an evaluation where we do testing, we have to get the parents' consent to do that testing. And then once we do the testing, we sit down and have an evaluation meeting to determine if the student qualifies. There again are criteria that they have to meet in order to qualify for that service. And then if they do qualify, we go on to write the Section 504 plan, which again is accommodations that are appropriate that they would need in the classroom, maybe extended time on tests or preferential seating near the teacher or a hearing device, something along those lines so that so the teacher's voice is amplified, those types of things.
so it's not finding them as students with special needs first?
It is identifying the student as a student with a disability, but the difference between like having an IEP or being in special education is that when you do that evaluation, the questions you have to ask to are kind of what category do they fit in? There's multiple categories of special education. But the biggest differences between the two plans is an IEP has goals, specific goals. So if reading is the deficit, there might be a reading goal. If behavior is a deficit, there might be a behavior goal. And then they also have goals, and then they also have specialized services. So that special ed teacher would be providing that social skills instruction or that reading instruction. With a 504 plan, they're just getting accommodations. Accommodations can also be written into an IEP, but goals and specialized instruction can't be written into a Section 504 plan. So that's the biggest difference between the two is one has goals and specialized instruction and accommodations, and the other one just has accommodations.
And who makes sure that the accommodations are being provided?
Yeah, our school psychologists of each building coordinate the 504s. So at the beginning of each semester and year, kind of depending on what level they're in, the teachers that have that student get copies, including, music, art, those things. They also have times at the beginning of the year, beginning of the semester at middle school and high school where they sit down with individuals. If there's a plan that's somewhat complex, walk through it, talk about any questions the teacher might have, but ultimately the Section 504 accommodations are provided in the regular ed classroom by the regular ed teacher. But the school psychologist oversees the process and makes sure that that communication is there. So they might get a copy electronically, they might get a hard copy in their mailbox. Like it's their requirement to make sure that every teacher that has that student knows about those accommodations.
And they
And I know-
periodically get reviewed too, just like an IEP.
Okay, they do. I know the
Yes.
IEPs are reviewed all the time.
Yep,
They get-
and so
they
are
get
all the
reviewed.
504 plans. Yep.
Okay.
They all get reviewed.
I
Motion
propose
to-
that, make a motion that we approve this. 342.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The next item is 342.9. And this is one that we're just looking to recode. As we're kind of going through and reviewing these, and we're adding some policies in, some numbers need to be recoded. District daycare programs, these are really our after-school programs that we contract with. We just have some policies that direct them. We're not recommending any changes to the policies, but we're wanting to recode them from 342.8 to recode them to 342.9.
And that's because WASB has
Yeah.
a through 42.8.
Right. So there's, as we kind of went through the coding and we've added some things in, there was some overlap and we just need to make sure that they're separate.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
The next one we get to is 342.11. We're actually going to read, this is again one that we are looking to keep the policy that we have in place right now, but it's again one that we're going to recode from 342.11 to 342.10. Similar reason. looking to keep this policy. This is with regarding to recording of IEP meetings in section 504.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Next item is 343.1. This is middle school class load and course selection. This is one we're actually going to ask the board to repeal. We just don't feel we need it. The history of it is it goes back to its inception when we moved from a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade middle school to a 7th and 8th grade middle school. And there were some concerns just with regards to how course selection would take place and how kids would be assigned to classes and course loads, etc. We just don't feel that it's necessary at this point. When we take a look at how we're structured with our course selections right now, this is really just a policy that doesn't have relevancy. It's actually gotten in the way of a few things with regards to changes in schedules that we've made in the past, and we kind of went against policy to make some accommodations for parents. So we just don't feel the policy really needs to be there. It's more of kind of a course selection and kind of opting in and out of electives. It's really more of a high school type of a policy, but really isn't necessary for the middle school.
Move to repeal.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So the next one is class size. These are important policies for us, and we're going to make a couple of recommendations for changes. So first of all, 343.2 is just the general class size policy. We're not looking to make any changes to that, but we are looking to make changes to our class size guidelines. And this is with regards to, Rebecca, pull it up and you'll be able to see what we have. This is a really important policy for us because it guides really our class sizes. And when we're adding new staff, it also is a really impactful one when we are looking at open enrollment. So for open enrollment, in January, you're going to be asked to identify which grade levels and which schools do you have availability to add students for open enrollment. We have a very strict open enrollment policy that only allows space if we are at a class sizes of optimal or less. So it's actually relatively hard to get into our district through open enrollment. So we need to keep those parameters and those numbers there. They're very important for us. But as we look at our current practices and as we also look at some of our classes that have evolved over time, we need to make a few modifications, particularly the very first line. It says recommended class sizes other than special ed, where we want to add online, bilingual, and English language learner classes to kind of be outside of these numbers. Because those are really, we had special ed in there because those can be very small numbers. Those can be one-on-one at times. But we also are looking at kind of the bilingual program and the English language learner program. And as those continue to expand, those aren't going to have 20-some kids in a classroom. So we just want to exempt those pieces out and be transparent about that. We recommend keeping the class sizes the same for the other areas. And then at the next paragraph down, it says any class that falls 3 students above the maximum or below the minimum size needs to prior approval from the superintendent. In any class less than 12 or more than the 28 and 33, that's kind of the maximum numbers. We'll need approval from, we're just looking to move that from, to keep it consistent with the first line, to keep it approval from the board to move it over to the district administrator and move it to my office. I don't believe there's ever been a point we've had to bring that to the board, but I also look at when you're starting to make decisions on some of those kind of pieces, having to either wait between board meetings. We can certainly have a piece if you want to be informed in those, and we usually bring some things with class sizes forward at different points of our school year, but we'd recommend changing that from Board of Education to District Administration.
Are there any guidelines for bilingual or English language learners? I mean, that's just open as to.
Just open, right? It's basic, yeah, we're gonna service those kids. That's kind of what it is.
I don't doubt that you're going to service them, but I wondered if it's going to be, when's a sense that it's too many?
Oh, sure. I guess it's not gonna have a hard number,
Yeah,
but it will be a piece. Obviously, if we need addition, it's kind of like special education. There's not a number for that. But you see that when we start to get to caseloads that are at a point where we need additional staff, we bring those forward to the board. I would treat those the same way.
so it's kind of a year by year, do we need to add staff to
Absolutely,
it?
absolutely. And then the other piece from like the online aspect, online has changed drastically over the last several years. I mean, previously, online was not something we did as kind of a kind of a one-off and very special circumstances. If you went back probably 5 years ago, maybe even longer than that, it was pretty stringent as far as how we could even offer online programs. At this point, we do have, I mean, the board has approved through our curriculum pieces that we are able to offer online options. Not a lot of kids take part in those, but we certainly do have kids that are participating. And those are, there's different versions of that. We belong to the eSchool network. And so it's really not driven by class size. It's really driven by individual student need.
And Judy, our reason for putting that was that
Yeah.
they would be below the minimum. Like, we
Right.
aren't worried about having them above the maximum. It's that we just want to be transparent that we
That you
have
can
some
make a
smaller
class of two
classes.
if you have.
Yeah, you're gonna have some small classes there.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are the changes that we would recommend at this time.
Motion to approve.
Second,
All in favor? Aye.
That's the end of our list.
It is.
All right.
took me longer to read all this stuff.
Yeah. Always a bit to read.
First I had to put them in piles.
They organize it so well.
Yeah.
So we'll look to, I think we have future meetings set up.
When's our next one? Let me just make sure. 17th of November? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Same place.
So with that, I'll take a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for that.
We're recording. All right.